This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. Today's episode, Steve Berkowitz, The Many Hats of a Local Legend, is about the iconic life and career of one of the coolest cats alive today in the music industry. He's been an artist manager, road manager, booking agent, concert promoter, guitar player, retail record buyer, recording studio owner, DJ, truck driver, NCAA basketball ref, Columbia and Sony Legacy records exec, roadie, and a soda jerk. Berkowitz grew up in Brighton, Mass., road managed the cars when they hit it big, became the driving force behind Sony Legacy Records, the reissue wing of Sony Music, and has won a ton of Grammys and Blues Foundation Music Awards over the years. A few years ago, at Abbey Road's Records in London, Steve supervised the re-release of the entire Beatles catalog from the absolutely original mono master tapes. He also has been the longtime leader of the blues R&B band T-Blade and the Fabulous Esquires, a killer decades-old collection of some of Boston's other most highly respected notables. It is truly an honor to have my old friend Steve Berkowitz, aka T-Blade, here talking with me today. Welcome to Wachtelligence, Steve.
Hello, AJ. Good afternoon. Hello, everybody.
Before we get started, when were you an NCAA basketball ref?
When I went back to college to UMass in 74, 75, and I did almost all music and radio related stuff and figured I had to move around. I took a sports officiating course through the athletic department, and the final exam was the written NCAA basketball referee test, which I passed. And then they said, oh, if you want, there'll be the floor exercise tomorrow. And if you want to do that. So I did it and I passed. And I've got credentials. You know, it's like a major minor league system, is that I started with like high school, intramural, junior college. And I never really worked past that, but I did have a card and credentials and a very cool macrame whistle, lariat with beads on it. And that was, hippie days. So that was a lot of fun.
Hey, and when were you a soda jerk in Brighton Center?
I was a soda jerk at a couple of different pharmacies in Brighton and Brookline. Alston Pharmacy at the corner of Alston Street and Kelton. Commonwealth Pharmacy, which was at Com Ave and Alston Street. And then for quite a few years, Summit Pharmacy at Summit Ave and Beacon Street.
Well, you were raised in Brighton in the projects of Fidelis Way on Alston Street, and your first apartment was a block out of Brighton Center on Peaceable Street. You played in and around Boston as early as 1963. Tell me about that. You were a drummer first in a folk duo with your cousin Jim Richmond, right?
That is amazing that you know that. And yes, that's true. It was post-World War II time, and all the dads had, from the GI Bill had gotten apartments in the projects at Fidelis Way, and eventually they got jobs. And I lived in sort of a very old European way in Brighton, where the backyard of my house touched my aunt and my uncle and my grandparents' house. And one of the people in the backyard was Cousin Jim, who was a really good guitar player and singer. And, by the early 60s, I was 10 or 11, we had started a combo called the Internationals. And because a couple of the other guys had come from Nova Scotia, from Canada. So, there was the Canadian American thing. We were very international. And probably played my first gig for money. And so is making money designate that you're a professional in the music business?
Well, I guess so at that time. And you were playing on drums, right?
So that would have been 60 years ago.
Well, you were at drums, right?
I was 10 or 11, and I would play drums for, actually, Cousin Jim and I would open the set. We would do like a folk duo thing and sing, Brothers Four and Roy Orbison songs. Well, they were green fields Kissed by the Sun. And then, of course, it was sort of more like, once there were great fields. But, and then I would go back and play the drums at the beginning of, we would learn Beatles stuff. And we did a lot of Dave Clark 5 songs, which was fun to drum on, that's for sure.
Anyone else in your family musicians or performers or artists?
Yeah, well, both my mother was, it didn't dawn on me till later. My mother was, didn't go to college and grew up also in Brighton, could play the piano and read music. So it was very common for her to just sit down and open up any sheet music and play anything. And my oldest brother got, lessons, and my middle brother got lessons of piano. And by the time they got to me, they go, we're not wasting our money on a third one. So of course, I went into music, but I never had any lessons. I took 5 guitar lessons once in Coolidge Corner from these.
When you were about 13 years old, right?
Yeah, from these twin sisters who were like 18, and they had like matching Fender Mustangs and short and white boots. They were the greatest lessons I ever had.
Why did you switch from drums to guitar?
Well, I'll be totally honest with you. I wanted drums, but the drums I had borrowed from my oldest brother's friend who lived another block away from us. And I asked my parents to help me get drums, and they said we couldn't afford it. And instead, they bought me a record player. So with my own money, I bought a guitar, at Leachmere Sales for $18, around the same time. And then by the time I was 13, I had a bar mitzvah, and I was able to keep the money that my friends had given me as presents. And I bought a Vox Bulldog amp at Leachmere at Wurlitzer's, and I had bought a Crucianelli electric guitar, which was a Vox guitar made in Italy, which was a very cool Batman looking guitar. And I wish I still had it. It was a very cool guitar. But a couple of years later, I traded the Crucianelli for my first Gibson guitar. That was in about 1966, which I still have.
What was the local scene like in those days? You once told me that it was a college music town, so it's always been hip in that way.
Well, yeah, there's more college kids, and at that time there were probably more gigs in Boston than any other city on the planet, because there were gigs, there were clubs, there were no alcohol clubs, there were CYO dances,
coffee houses,
and clubs that would have all ages shows. But then there was all of the frat houses and the dorms. So like any night of the week, once I was aware of it in the mid 60s, there was like 75 gigs a night in Boston to go to.
And the Cape and the Islands too.
Yeah, eventually I could get there, but I'm talking about gigs before I was 16 and drove, and we were playing all these places. I was even playing in the combat zone when I was 15 or 16.
So what's changed so much in Boston now? Why is it not like that?
Because people don't pay musicians anymore, because that sucks. They're happy with, third-party music and making a playlist, and it's much harder for musicians to play. It's much harder for clubs to stay open. COVID certainly has turned everything sideways, and nothing's turned right back up yet.
The internet too.
To a predictable manner. And the culture is different. It's before the 60s there weren't that many gigs either, and there were just as many young people. It's just changing times, where sometimes there's a lot of gigs and sometimes there's not a lot of gigs. But once the music business post Beatles established itself as a bigger idea and a bigger presence, and a youth revolution had occurred, certainly after Elvis, and then certainly the Beatles and Motown and Stax, it was a different thing, where there was music all over the place, and there were gigs to afford it, and there were people to afford it, and it was a thing to go to. But, the technology moved on and changed, which I'm not qualifying as positive or negative. I don't want things to go backwards. I want things to go forwards. But I would like there to be more. My whole thing, AJ, we could get to the beginning and the end of this, and my slogan is always more music, more communications, more human touching, better world.
And that's a great saying.
And in that, I am an arts activist at the heart of this whole thing, and a true 60s hippie who manages somehow to still do it.
So, what were some of the popular bands back there in Boston? Barry and the Remains, the Ramrods.
Yeah, there was that, and
The
I
G
got
Claps.
I got to see the Hallucinations pretty early, which was Pete Wolf. I remember, I think I first saw Pete Wolf with the Hallucinations in a twin bill with the Rock and Ramrods at a club in Kenmore Square called Where It's At, which was kind of right in the middle of Kenmore Square on the Katie's Lucifer side on the second floor of an office building. And I saw Screaming Jay Hawkins, but that's, seeing the Ramrods, which at that time was the loudest band I had ever seen and remained so until I saw Pink Floyd. There's something about the Vox organ, but that's where I first saw Pete Wolf. And, I was able at a young age to go to Club 47 a lot. So, I mean, it sounds like ancient history, and I guess maybe it is, but on a weekly basis would be, Doc Watson, Paul Butterfield, Bill Monroe, the Queskin Jug Band, night after night after night of this stuff. It's like the Americana Fest in Nashville happened every fucking night at Club 47. It was going on all the time. Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Eric Anderson and Joan Baez every single night. And there was no alcohol, so you could go all the time.
It was a very deep scene, like you just said, you were lucky enough to attend hundreds of shows at clubs around towns like the Boston Tea Party, the Psychedelic Supermarket, Club 47 you mentioned, the Unicorn, Coffee House, the Catacombs, Lenny's, Sandy's, Joe's Place, Inman Square Men's Bar, Jonathan Swift's, Jack's, Katie's, Spit, Bud Ratty's. Tell us a few of the best shows you've ever seen in Boston.
Well, recently I got to see Bob Dylan again a couple of times on this most recent swing, and I was touched by how fortunate I was to be alive and to have seen the entire arc of Bob Dylan, because in 1964, when I was 12 or 13, I went with my brother Bill. I don't remember if it was the Donley Theater, which became the Back Bay Theater, which was a half a block away from Symphony Hall, or Symphony Hall. I just don't remember. But I got to see Bob Dylan play acoustic before he ever went electric. And so that touched me recently as very memorable, because I went, wow, it's like you're in Shakespeare's midst and you read everything he wrote while he wrote it. And this is like knowing that I've been seeing Bob Dylan for 60 years is a trip. But early on, I mean, one of the most amazing things is around the time of the Beatles, the auto show used to take place at the Commonwealth Armory, which is now part of BU. And that's where the car show was. So about 1964, I hadn't been to any, big rock shows recently. I'd been to the local, what was it, St. Columkills. There was a place down on Everett Ave. There was where bands used to play. And that was always a big scene. And people would make out underneath the Everett Street Bridge, and knife fights might have happened, and T-Blade's name might have happened under that bridge. But that's another story for another day, AJ. Don't push me with that. I saw a band called The Minutes, which was a band that had come from England that someone from the car show brought over. So I thought I was seeing like the Beatles and the Stones. And The Minutes, I think, made like 3 records on Decca or something. They played at the car show, but it was like a real English band, and it was like the British Invasion. That was very impressive to see. I didn't see Barry and the Remains until later. There were a lot of really good bands. There were all the surf bands, which were very professional and good, from the Surf Nantasket, and the people there kind of managed a bunch of bands, and they'd play.
And there were jazz bands too.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to go, the Jazz Workshop in Paul's Mall and see Miles Davis and see Bill Evans. And then I would see Muddy Waters and Junior Wells and Otis Band and Howlin' Wolf at Club 47, at the Unicorn, at Paul's Mall and Jazz Workshop. It was just like a regular thing to do. And if you had $5, you could do it. Because it was like $2 to get in, or $2.50, and then like get to buy 2 Cokes. So that was $4 more.
Hey, in 66 or 67, that era, you met Luther Guitar Boy Snake Johnson, who was Muddy Waters' guitarist. How did this happen?
That was fun. I was being an usher at the Commonwealth Armory. This is probably 66, something like that. And George Papadopoulos, who owned the Unicorn Coffee House, put together this festival around the same time as Newport. So there was the Newport Folk Festival, and he booked a lot of the people into Boston and called it, I forget what I just called it, the Great American Folk Music Festival or something like that. And on a bill one day was Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, John Lee Hooker, this woman singer from Boston named Leonard, who was a Caucasian woman who had put out a record on Epic, and Josh White Sr. and some African dancers. And it was an incredible show. Now, there's no cell phones, there's no computers. There's not even such thing as backstage yet. But I was an usher, and I was going, wow, Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry were here. And I was just completely into them. And I had bought my 330 already, my Gibson 330, because I wanted a Chuck Berry guitar. And so I went back after I ushed for a while, and I was just kind of backstage, and suddenly says, Chuck Berry broke a string. Who knows how to change a string? And I go, I know how to change a string. So suddenly, all of a sudden, I am instantly a roadie. Like, bang, I'm 14, and someone goes, here, change Chuck Berry's string. So it's like they're handing you the keys to the palace. It's the crown. Someone just hands me Chuck Berry's red 345, and it's like, oh my God, this is the guitar. So I change the string and I tune it up and I listen and I get it back in tune. But by this time, Chuck Berry is being backed by the Muddy Waters band. So I always thought that this was the most authentic Chuck Berry concert that I could ever have seen, because for one thing, Otis Spann was the piano player, and Otis Spann had played on a lot of the original Chuck Berry recordings, for Chess Records. And then all of a sudden, Chuck Berry is playing, and Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker are doing the twist, and the whole thing is fantastic. And I'm hanging around now backstage, and I'm watching them kind of jam. And suddenly, a guy in his probably late 20s, early 30s with conked back hair, Luther Georgia Boy Snake Johnson, walks up to me and says, hey, buddy, I've been thinking about these two women over here. Now there's these two 25-year-old white women, and he's deciding we're going to have to pick them up. So I'm like 14 or 15 years old, but I'm already 6 feet tall. And I said, oh, yeah. So we end up going and meeting these two ladies. And then across the street from the Armory, then there was a Hayes Bickford, a diner. So we went with Muddy and his security guy, Bo, who later got killed in a car crash, and the whole Muddy Waters band. And I'm sitting there with them, and I'm going, this is unbelievable. I'm like having a hamburger with Muddy Waters. And then we go back, and they're hanging around some more. And then a jam breaks out, and it's Muddy and John Lee Hooker and Chuck Berry are jamming. Let's face it, they are jamming because they're all interested in Leonda. So she is singing with them as well. And then Luther says, so you play? I go, yeah, I play. And he hands me a guitar. I am now jamming with Chuck Berry, John Lee Hooker, and Muddy Waters, and I guess Leonda. But again, I'm 14 or 15. I've been pinched and gone to heaven here. And I played a solo. And I know we're doing this only audio-wise, but I finished the solo, and Muddy Waters, turns to me and like nods and gives an approving eye, like, yeah. And I go, God, I'm in. I got the nod from Muddy. So that's how I met Luther. And by a year or two later, he had left Muddy's band, and I played in his band, along with Vinnie Formosi and Tuffy Kimball on drums, and sometimes Ron Levy on keyboards. The bass player was a guy named Stephen Lovelace Swine, who plays a big role in the punk scene later on as well.
I ran into Tuffy. I ran into Tuffy about 2 or 3 years ago when Luther guitar, a different Luther.
The other Luther.
The other Luther was playing at Johnny D's. And all of a sudden I said, hey, little man, are you really, who you looked at me? And he goes, yeah. And I hadn't seen him for years. He's still alive, last I heard.
I hope he is. He was a good guy, Tuffy, and he could really play at a solid backbeat. He was a good drummer, very good time. That was good. But so wait, I got one funny story about Luther. So, if you wanted to play Nantucket or the Vineyard in the summer, you had to play in the winter. So we get sent over there in the wintertime to play the chicken box in Nantucket, and it's the middle of frickin' winter. And again, I think I'm still in high school, but my parents let me go and do this. And so I go with Luther, and transportation is Swine has a hearse. So the whole band and all the gear are in this big black hearse on the ferry over to Nantucket. And so we get there, and it's already the winter months. So of course we get there, and it's dark. It's 4:00 in the afternoon, and it's dark, but we don't have to play till the next day. And they send us out. They're going to send us out to this band house, which is behind the club. I think it was the Chicken Bark or Preston's Airport Lounge. I don't remember. And I'm not sure that anybody who hears this audio of yours would remember that there was such clubs anyway. So I knew that I had been to Nantucket before, and I know there's some stores here, so we should get something to eat because it's Nantucket in the middle of the winter. What the hell's going to be open? Nothing. So we go, and there was an A&P supermarket in downtown, wherever the boat came in Nantucket. So the hearse, now it's snowing, it's dark, there's an inch of snow on the ground. Now this hearse is creeping through this empty parking lot with an inch of snow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And we get up, and the A&P is clearly closed. And someone goes, gee, I wonder if they're open. And to me, Luther Johnson says a very famous comedic thing and says, well, either the day's closed or them people's are shopping in the dark. But the kid saved the day. I said, wait a minute, isn't there a store 24 like at the end of Main Street in downtown? Let's go there. Why? I said, go to the store 24. We went to the store 24, and I bought like a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread and butter and other stuff. And sure enough, we get back to the band house. There's nothing to cook on, but there's this big space heater that's flat. And I look at it and I'm going, guys, we're all set. As long as we can find a frying pan. I'm like 15 years old, and I made fried egg sandwiches for everybody. And they're going, the kid is all right. The kid is
Hey, you also played with Hal. You started playing guitar with Howlin' Wolf. Is that fact?
That's a little bit of a fact. Yes, it is. After around the end of the Alston All-Stars in 74, I had known and sat in with Eddie Shaw and the Wolf Gang, who was the manager, and then they were the backup band with Wolf at the time. Wolf was pretty old. This is, I don't know, 73. It was within a year or so before Wolf died. And Hubert had gone off to Europe. Hubert Sumlin had gone off to Europe to play in some, blues all-star tours on the road. And I got a call from Eddie Shaw saying, hey, Blade, you want to come play with the Wolf? Duh. So, yeah, there was some out-of-town gigs in Maine and Western Mass and a gig in Philly. And it was incredible. It was incredible to do it. And that gig changed my life.
How?
Well, because I wanted to play the blues, but I also like new music a lot. And I was incredibly enamored with Butterfield and Blues Project, Bloomfield, Cream, of bands that were taking the blues and turning it into something else. The Stones, obviously. But now what I had done was I had succeeded in getting, at a pretty young age, I was 21 or 22, to play gigs with Eddie Shaw. Or, by this time, I had played with Mojo Buford, who had also been in Muddy's band, the harp player, and along with Bob Margolin and Dave Maxwell and Kaz in Mojo Buford's band. And it had backed up gigs with, the All-Stars. The All-Stars had played with John Lee Hooker. We had opened to Butterfield. We had opened to Willie Dixon. We played with the Thunderbirds. We'd played along with Stevie Ray. We had opened for Aerosmith. We both played with and for Hubert Sumlin. The All-Stars had opened on the Cambridge Common with a new group that showed up in town called the Allman Brothers. And I'm going, I really want to do new stuff. But I woke up in the morning in Maine after playing with Wolf. And I thought, well, okay, you've been to the top of the mountain now. And you're not black, you're not 50, and you feel, I'm not from Mississippi, I'm not from Louisiana, and I feel just fine. you know what, Berkowitz, you're probably not going to play better than B.B. King, and you're not going to sing better than Ray Charles. And I knew that I knew the difference between good and great. And I didn't think playing wise I was great. I was good, but I didn't think I was great. And I needed great. So that was when I went, I think I'm going to stop regularly playing and learn more about music and try to work with people who are great.
Well, you became a tour and a road manager for a bunch of bands, including the Cars with Lookout Management. How'd you get involved with the Cars?
Well, after I went to Amherst and I took a job, it wasn't a student thing. I took a job for the food service company and I booked, there were 3 big clubs on campus. And one of them sold more beer than any bar in America at the time, the Blue Wall. And I had an enormous budget to buy artists. And I had a disco and a lounge, and I had a 1,500 seat place and an 800 seat place. And it was just make us money. So I got involved with all of the booking agents in New York and booked all sorts of big stuff, from Gary Burton and Sonny Stitt to a package from a brand new club called CBGB's, and booked the Talking Heads and Talking Heads and Television together out of CBGB's to come up and play at the Blue Wall. That must have been in 76 or early 77. And then I also partnered with a guy and became a concert promoter and did a lot of shows at the Academy of Music Theater in Northampton. Very beautiful old theater, which still stands, and it's a gorgeous, one of the 4 or 5 older theaters in America, and probably produced 50 or 60 shows there, all double bills, like Emmy Lou and Jonathan Edwards, Taj Mahal and Jimmy Cliff, Buddy Rich and Woody Herman, like always these double bills, Ry Cooter and Tom Waits. Like a lot of really great shows. They were all double bills. And then also a series of jazz concerts in Springfield, Mass. with Keith Jarrett, Gary Burton, and early Pat Metheny. It's Charles Lloyd, etc. And then I moved back to Boston and I was an agent. I became an agent for about a year, which was the very beginning roots of knowing the guys in the Cars, because the other guy in the pit at the agent was booking a band called Captain Swing, which was the step before the Cars. My friend Alan Kaufman, who has passed, who was a wonderful guy, and then somehow I stopped being an agent and I was looking for other stuff to do. And the first thing I did on the road was I was tour manager for Livingston Taylor. And it was me and Liv in the back of a station wagon, and I would mix sound and do lights and tune the guitar and tune the banjos. And also, earlier than that...
Wait. Did you ever fly in a plane that Livingston Taylor piloted?
I don't think he was a pilot yet then. We drove around in a station wagon that I think was his.
Okay. I just wanted to know.
And sometimes I would drive, and I didn't have a pilot's license either. But, in the early 70s, there was another important step in my life, which was a guy came from England named Dinky Dawson, who I'm sure you've known, and was one of the people to help him build his fantastic new PA system that he had in America, which he took out eventually with the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Lou Reed.
He was one of the first sound engineers to mix from the audience instead of right below the orchestra or right off stage. I mean, he's a legendary man.
Oh, he sure is. And I got to learn under him, and spent a summer in a garage building speaker cabinets and soldering crossovers. And I learned a lot from Dinky and another guy named Andy Topeka, who worked with Aerosmith and later the Cars, and helped Andy build a lot of the stuff as well, a genius, electronics and every other kind of guy. So all of this stuff was in my head. And my brother Bill used to build speaker systems, and we had little home studios all the time I was growing up and recording things as well. So the Willie Alexander thing happened because I had known the manager, Charlie McKenzie, who had managed Boston. But when I worked in the record store, he was the local promo guy, and we were friends. And many years later, we found out we might have had the same girlfriend at the same time and didn't know it. So
that was pretty common with Charlie.
That was a different story. Well, we were good friends, and he was okay by me, Chuck, until he met his untimely demise.
Yes.
I was in Boston and I was looking for stuff to do, and I had been consulting various people, and I had worked in the record store with David Robinson, the drummer of the Cars, and I had done these blues jams through this guy, Alan Kaufman, with Elliot Easton. So I had gone to see the Cars and knew they existed. And just before their album came out, they asked me to be their tour manager. And I took the gig. It was like $150 a week. And it was tremendous, great work to work with them and to be on this escalator that was quickly rising. And I started as tour manager and eventually became co-manager with Elliot Roberts. And
you also were part owner of Synchro Sound, their recording studio.
well, I took part in Synchro Sound and did manage the place, yes. And worked with the Cars from 78 to 83 and their first four albums and the beginning of the fifth one. And it was a very rich time period and a great one. And happy that I still know the guys. I'm sorry that, Ben and Rick have left us.
Do you still keep in touch with them, with Elliot, David, and Greg?
Well, especially with David. Yeah, I do. And I went to their induction at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a number of years back. I was happy to cheer them on and celebrate that and know that I had a part in it as well for those years.
Well, you saw them going from playing not bun ratties, from playing the Rat in small clubs to arenas. That was like overnight, wasn't it?
Well, it was certainly every night that we didn't sleep for a fucking year, but that was a good year. We went from me and the five guys basically in a station wagon with suitcases on top and a couple of roadie guys in a van going from playing little tiny clubs where they thought the band were, and I will use the old vernacular, they're a bunch of English fags. I went, well, they're neither English nor fags, but what difference does that make? They're neither, but we went from literally playing like a club to nobody in Cape Cod to exactly 1 year later flying overnight from Paris and headlining the Spectrum in Philadelphia in 1 year, and 1 year that I didn't go home.
Why they become so famous so quickly?
Songs were good. End of story. The songs were good. They played them well. They were all great players, and it was properly promoted, but the songs and the music were there to be discovered, and they were discovered.
Your next step was working in A&R and signing acts like Jeff Buckley, Henry Threadgill, and Ministry.
While at Lookout Management, I opened an East Coast office of Lookout, which had been the company of Elliot Roberts and David Geffen.
Okay.
And in that capacity, besides being a manager and working closely with the Cars, and then I worked with the New Models in Boston, and then eventually signed Ministry. I went and found them in Chicago, and we signed them and to their deal to Arista. But I am a musician and I like music, and being a manager is great, and the time with the Cars was great, but I never meant to be about that kind of management and the next truck deal and the next t-shirt deal. And that's, I care about the music and the arts, and if you got to be the manager, you got to be the manager. But I continuously drifted back into the music and the production because it's where I really came from. And I really wanted to kind of be Peter Asher, which was to manage an act and produce it. So there was a step, after Lookout Management in 83, 84, where I started a company called Serious Business. And I managed Push Push in Boston, and a guy on the West Coast named Bill Gable, and the band from Boston, Chain Link Fence. And I wanted to be Peter Asher. I wanted to produce and manage them and have that type of relationship with them. I had the management chops. I thought I had the music chops, and I wanted to put the two things together. And it was a really great 3 or 4 years. And though Bill Gable got signed to private A&M, Chain Link Fence had a local thing. I was always disappointing to not have Push Push, Dennis Brennan and those guys get signed, because they were really good. And the songs, if you hear them now, stand up and they're good.
Well, that's how we met with Push Push. I was writing for Beat Magazine, and they had assigned another writer a story, and you weren't happy with the story. And of course, they assigned it to me, and I knew I'd never. This was a couple of years after you stopped working with the Cars. You were a legend. You were famous and everything, and I knew I had never met you before. And I remember.
I think you used the word legend loosely there, AJ.
They assigned me the story to do Push Push. And I was just wild and crazy. I'd never met you before. So we met at a Fens bar. You bought us all drinks. You bought us all beers. And I guzzled 2 quick beers. And I wiped my mouth and I belched. And I knew that you were unhappy with the first guy. And I figured, oh man, these guys don't know me. They're going to think that they're going to get a shit story from the latest loser. But I wrote a good story for you. And that's probably about 40 years ago, and I'm still friends with you.
That's true. That's true. And the beer quaffing was impressive then. And,
do you remember that night when I'm talking about?
I'm confused between that night and another night underneath the moose at Bunratty's where you were quaffing beers in the same way. You know, the moose that the guy Dennis used to shoot at Scumratty's. But what I wanted to talk about though was Push Push and how good they were and what a good effort. And I'm so glad that Dennis is at least
still playing.
He's playing and he's really good. He's sort of like the dean of the Americana songwriters, and he's written a lot of really good songs. And all those guys in Push Push were excellent players, all of them. So I was, we had a weird, as it will happen with many bands, with, the Schemers or the Nervous Eaters, or a lot of bands who you thought were really good, who could make it. The cards came up wrong, or I played it wrong. I don't know what happened, and I always felt bad about that. But at the same time as I was doing that, that's when I started T-Blade and the Fabulous Esquires. Between my other jobs, it was in me and it had to come out, so I had to play. And, I went back, I gravitated back to working with Rosie, who I'd worked with in the Alston All-Stars in the early 70s, and we partnered together with most of the ex-guys from the original
11th Hour.
James Montgomery band. Yeah. Billy Mather on bass and Dave Case on keyboards and Chuck Perro on drums and Rosie on harmonica and Paul Leonard on other guitar, and at other times Dave Maxwell on piano or Larry Ledicke, and our sax players, Kaz and Mikey Biblick and Derek Dyer, and our backup drummer was Tommy Hambridge. Yeah. and Mickey Avery, and these were all terrific, really great players, and it was a really great scene, and that was a lot of fun, and hundreds of wild, great rockin' nights all over the place with that band.
Does T-Blade have a last name?
No.
Okay, just curious.
It stands for The Blade. I mean, in the world of fantasy, T-Blade is the middle name of Dominic the Blade Peroso, which was a pseudonym of mine at another time in the late 60s. That's also when I made the T-Blade album as kind of a goodbye kiss from the Cars. They said, here, you can, use this studio. So the one T-Blade album is made in the same place as Aerosmith's first record and the Cars' third record or Cars' fourth record, and a lot of other great stuff. And I listened to that record recently, and there's some good stuff on it.
I'm looking at you right now, and I'm just reminded, we talked about this before. When I first met you, we both had those little mustaches under our lower lip. And I had been writing in the Beat magazine, all these different people had given me different names, Blues Dot, Soul Patch, things like that. You told me that the name was Wunz.
Yes.
And you got it from your grandfather. Your Wunz is a lot larger now than it was when I first knew you. It's white, but it's huge and it's impressive. Please tell me the background and why it's called a Wunz.
My grandfather called it a Wunz, which meant in his Lithuanian Russian kind of accent, and he would do this thing with his finger, making the motion of a caterpillar crawling across. And he goes, that's not a beard, that's a Wunz. So he thought it looked like a little caterpillar. Now my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she called it a Zittelbeardla, which means a little goat beard.
We were just talking about Rosie Rosenblatt. Rosie is a great harp player, blues harp player, plays in Danny Klein from Jay Giles' band, and he's also the president of VizTone Records. You guys used to run Tone Cool, ToneCool Records, and I remember you telling me, I just asked Rosie about this, and Rosie says, "Oh, no, that was Steve Berkowitz. You got to ask him about it." You told me years ago that "ton cou" meant in French, "kiss my ass." Can you please clarify this?
Absolutely not. However, I can tell you that I didn't run Tone Cool Records. Rosie did. And he just was nice enough to decide after, I think, the first album, which was the 11th Hour Band, the second record, I think, was T-Blade. And then I think the third one was Susan Tedeschi. Something like that, which just recently came out again for the first time in years. Just Won't Burn, her great first record that Tom Hambridge produced and wrote on, and Susan got nominated for either Artist of the Year or Best New Artist of the Year when that just came out and kicked off her career. Look, I don't speak French. Rosie and his wife Mary do. And I was led to believe that "tone cool" is also sort of like the pronunciation of a kind of Cajun French "tone cool," which meant "kiss my ass." That's what I learned, and I didn't make that up. So somewhere over some late night beverages, this whole conversation has been confused. But "tone cool" to you too, AJ.
All right, you once told me that working on the music of Miles Davis and Bob Dylan was an honor and like adjusting the chapters of the Bible.
Yeah, it is.
What do you mean?
Well, these are some of the greatest artists of all time. Certainly the greatest artists of my lifetime, along with, Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and John Coltrane and, others. So let me back up. So eventually, when I did not become successful in my serious business endeavor, I was successful artistically and working with artists. And, there's a difference between the creation of art and the creation of money. They're two different things. It's lovely when they come together, but they do exist separately. And I'm always happy to be able to be involved with artists, especially so many good artists who are both known and unknown that I've worked with, to be able to have any kind of say or touch in the way that their music comes out. And I hold that in the highest of regard. And as long as I feel like I'm being let in or doing a job that they want me to do and I'm doing it satisfactorily, then I'm happy to do that. So, I eventually went to work for Columbia Records because I wasn't making any money at serious business. And my wife was going, we can't do this forever, You can't just try to keep making money and try to keep pushing the bands. But that's the plight of the independent manager or the independent producer. Is it's up to you to keep trying to get it to go. And I did, just up until the breaking point of our marriage, which fortunately did not break up and then lasted, another 25 years till Monique's passing just last year. But I got to Columbia Records and I had been a musician and I had been on the road and I'd been a successful manager and I toured around the world, and they put me in as kind of one of the heads of artist development. So I suddenly got involved in all these new bands and new tours, and I was involved with the New Kids on the Block. It was the beginning of kickoff of Mariah Carey and the beginning of Terence Trent D'Arby, and eventually became one of the heads of jazz and worked with the Marcelluses and a lot of other great people, Soul Asylum, the Presidents of the United States. And then, I signed Jeff Buckley, which was a wonderful thing when I was at Columbia Records, and other great artists, Henry Threadgill, Senegalese artist Youssou N'Dour.
Hey, let's talk about Buckley for 1 second. He passed very early, drowning. What do you think his legacy is?
Tremendous beauty, artistic feel, ability, quality, dashed too quickly because he made a mistake and had a bad accident. Good. I mean, his voice is unrivaled. I was in my car the other day and I played the song "Everyone Here Wants You." Oh my God, it's just a gorgeous song. And I don't know why a current R&B act doesn't cover that song right now and have a hit with it. I know everybody here wants you. Jeff had such tremendous vocal ability and feel and knowledge of music. And, you know, he was excited in Memphis one day and swam in the wrong place and drowned, which was tragic in a lot of ways, both as my friend, my buddy and friend of the family, and also an artist who I was really closely associated with. And it was a terrible thing. It still is.
Let me read you Rosie Rosenblatt's quote about you. When it comes to Steve Berkowitz, there is so much to talk about. For a quick smile, ask him about playing with Howlin' Wolf, or was it Muddy, and ask him something about Eddie Shaw, Hubert Sumlin, and Chico Chisholm.
Ah, Chico. Well, I talked to you before about Wolf and Muddy a little bit. Chico was Wolf's last drummer, and he had also played with Little Richard. Chico Chisholm was just the shit, man. He took me under his wing, and he would tell me these stories, and sometimes I could understand what he was saying, and sometimes I couldn't. But they would usually end up, you know, they call me Daddy Goodrock. The little girls understand, and I'd go, "Yeah, I got to learn that." You're right. You're absolutely right, Chico. He would tell me great shit. He would, when I just started to play with them, he'd go, "Now, Blade, you got something to say. I hear that right away. So here's what we're going to do. When you come up on the bandstand and Wolf nods at you and it's your time to play a solo, you look at me. I'll go whap, whap. We'll bring it down. You check yourself, and then you start out."
That's
now,
great.
That is the greatest, you know, direction in terms of on how to play a solo in the middle of a cacophonous club of blues fans of how to get focus. The whole idea of you look at me, I go whap whap, bring it down. You check yourself, and then you start out because you got something to say.
Rosie continues, but as a Boston player, he was in Little Latin Larry and the Loopy Louies, the Alston All-Stars, which we've talked about, T-Blade and the Fabulous Esquires. And he continues, over the years, he has had important relationships with Jeff Buckley and Leonard Cohen, and he's featured in a movie about each of them. And he's working on the remastering and marketing of albums by the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, Miles Davis, and he also continues to do a lot of work on Bob Dylan's releases and Aerosmith too. Have you ever met Miles or Bob?
Yes. Yes, both. And that was a treat. Oh, Miles has been gone for quite a long time already. And when I just started to work at Columbia Records on his catalog, you know, it was funny at the time. They said, "Well, you don't have to ask him anything. He's not on the label anymore." And I'm going, "Well, wait a minute. This is his life and his music. This is Miles Davis. I'm not going to just put stuff out." "Well, you don't have to." So it got arranged for me. I'll tell you the story. The Miles story is a great first story. We were doing the first box set. It's called the Columbia Years, 1987, 1955 to 1987. And, you know, funny enough, with my friends, Jeff Rosen, who's Bob Dylan's manager, and Jeff Jones, who runs the Beatles, Apple Music, we were the three doing this Miles Davis box. How they end up with Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and I'm sitting here talking to you, AJ, I don't know. But anyway, we thought, again, this is like at the very beginning, that at this point there had only been one other box set, which was the Bob Dylan Biograph box set. So we were working on the second box set. Maybe the Miles was the second, maybe Crossroads Eric Clapton was the second, but they were neck and neck back there in 86, 87. So we decided we would do this, and we called it'll be like a coffee table CD box set book. So it'll be big, and we'll put 5 albums in it, and we'll do it like originals, ballads, bop, compositions, electric. And each album would be kind of a different field of Miles's music. So we put the music together, we put the art together, we hire the great Boston writer who was also in New York, Nat Hentoff, to write the liner notes, and it's getting really done. But the idea is I want to send it to Miles to make sure that he's cool with it. So it's arranged that it gets sent up to his apartment on 74th Street here in New York City. And it's arranged, I'm going to call Miles Davis. I'm going to call him. I call Miles Davis, the phone rings. The phone gets picked up. Yeah. Miles, this is Steve Berkowitz calling from Columbia Records. How you doing today? I want to know if you got the stuff that I sent up to you, the photographs and the layouts and the cassettes of the music. So, okay, good. Well, so first of all, about the music, were you able to get a chance to listen to it? Are you happy the way that it's set up? Pause. And I hear, just give me the motherfucking money. Okay. All right. I don't know what to do with that. I go, well, what about the photographs? I kind of an overview of some photos people have seen, and we got other ones out of the archives. I think there's a lot of, really great pictures. You're happy with, with the photographs? Just give me the motherfucking money. Okay, Miles. So, I'm from Boston, and we hired Nat Hentoff, and he wrote the liner notes, and I know he's an old friend of yours. And have you had a chance to well, I asked him 5 questions, and each time I asked a question, I got, just give me the motherfucking money. And I said, anything that you like or you don't like, you want to tell me about. Click. He hung up. I walked into my boss's office and I said, Miles had no complaints about the box set, but I think you owe him a check. So we proceeded. I did get to meet him a couple of months later. We were doing a sort of East meets West American Japanese jazz festival thing at the Bottom Line. And I got introduced to Miles by Bill Cosby. So there you go. That was, and then I've gotten to work some with Bob Dylan, but I'm not going to pretend it's not like we're tight. Or I work through the management. They keep asking me to come back. I guess they think that the productions and the mastering or the mixes that I'm involved with are good, and they keep asking me.
You've won 2 Grammys from 2 of the albums that you've done on Bob Dylan.
3.
3
Grammys for Bob, from Bob Dylan box sets, 1 from the complete Louis Armstrong Hot 5s and Hot 7s, and 1 from the big box set of blues from the Martin Scorsese The Blues series. And look, Bob is Shakespeare. He's Edison. He's in our midst. It's incredible that I get close. And like I said, I went to see him when I was 12 years old, and the fact that I get to touch the music at all or to be trusted with something is a great, tremendous honor. And I take it as seriously as it could be. It's the music of one of the greatest artists that's ever lived. And it's incredible that someone would have the confidence in me to do that. And I take it 100% seriously. And I want to be able to present what he does in the best possible way.
Here's a quote from a person that's also associated with Bob Dylan, Harvey Brooks, the great bass player from Electric Flag, The Doors, Miles, who we were just talking about. He says, Steve has some of the best ears in the music business. If he likes it, you know it has quality. He is a true gentleman. Steve took the time to read my manuscript, View from the Bottom, a great book, folks, pick it up, and add his positive verbiage. And Bonnie, his wife, says, I have never personally met Steve, but we have mutual friends who have shared to me that he is a gem. We connected on Facebook when my daughter Julie was moving upward. I knew from friends his beautiful wife Monique was also struggling with her battle with the cancer terrorist. No words.
It's very sweet of both Harvey and Bonnie to say those things. And, Harvey, as I mentioned earlier, people who understood the blues and moved it into something else. And the fact that Harvey played with every folkie in the Village in the 60s, and then his work with Hendrix and the Electric Flag, which is a really important band to me, as was his later band, the Fabulous Rhinestones, who I loved a lot and got to see them whenever I could, which is a tremendous band. Look up the Fabulous Rhinestones records sometimes, folks. They're really wonderful records, a couple of them on that came out on Just Sunshine Records, in the late 60s or early 70s. So it's been a pleasure to get to know him, because Harvey was a hero of mine as well, and it's very kind of them to say all those nice things.
Let's talk a little bit about how you became the captain of Sony's legacy label, which is the reissue window of Sony Music. And you were the executive producer of the 26 CD box set Soundtrack for a Century. I brought up to you before that when I was in college, I remember studying hearing how Scott Joplin, how we didn't know from the recordings today how he really sounded live, because in 1935, Black artists just didn't have the money to record in top-notch studios. So maybe some of their material, I was told, might be 1 or 2 RPMs wrong, and they might not be exactly how they sounded live.
I don't know if there are Scott Joplin recordings. There's the music of Scott Joplin, and there were piano rolls that he actually did and made. And I would imagine that there are technicians who know how to operate those existing rolls with the player pianos to get them to play at the correct tempo and pitch. So I also think you're conflating, if that's the word, stories that people use in the music business now about a lot of music from the 20s and 30s, 40s, and take ideas about the music business from another time and relate them back to a different time. For instance, the music of Robert Johnson. I've been hearing for 25 years that the label monkeyed around with the recordings and sped them up so there would be bigger hits. Well, that's a twisted point of view. It's just twisted. First of all, recordings made in 1935 and 36 were completely analog. Once they were put into wax, or whatever the substance was that it was recorded onto, it was an analog process. Yes, the turntable was moving. It was supposed to be moving at 78 RPM. Whatever it was moving at, it stayed at, because it doesn't change, because it's a mechanical process. There is not a transference of the audio signal at any time. It goes from a wax cylinder, a wax cut, to a mold of the wax cut that's made over it. So it's exactly the same thing. You can't change the speed by putting a mold over it. And then you take that mold and you press a record. So once again, you've done nothing to alter the speed. What I can tell you is that the Robert Johnson material that we put out in the 80s, 90s, and still matched the speed and pitch of the original 78s, which we have accessed and utilized. The other reason is when we did the complete Robert Johnson Centennial package that got done, we included a CD in it of other recordings that were made in Dallas, 1935, I think. So the thing is, hard to tell with Robert Johnson because it's one guitar player and one singer simultaneously. You could pitch that up or down and not really be able to tell how that guitar was exactly tuned. Was it at 440? Was it at 442? Was it at 435? How could you tell? The only way you could tell is the exact same day in the exact same space, there were other bands that played and there were pianos. And when we transferred this again, it matched to A440 on the piano.
That's fascinating. How would I ever know something like that? That's just incredible. That's great.
Well, I know because I listen to the music and I try to hear it, but also I work with very talented musicians and historians. And as a producer, I confer with smart people to make sure that what we're doing is correct.
Well, when you're putting these box sets together, what some of the blues? What are some of the rarest recordings that you've heard?
The rarest recordings I've heard could be any number of previously unknown, unreleased Miles or unreleased Bob, or stuff from Leonard Cohen's home studio, or from stuff from Johnny Cash's house. The unreleased Robert Johnson that we located at Sony that everybody thought was lost, all those outtakes to make it the complete Robert Johnson, none of that. I mean, there's lots and lots of rare. There's I mean, last year I put out Aerosmith 1971, The Road Starts Here, which was a recording that Joe Perry made on his Wallensack 2 years before their first album. Nobody had ever heard that before. So there is still great stuff out there, that we know and that we don't know to listen to. And any artist of any size and scope, my guess will be is that there's, if you went into the studio for equal to 3 albums, there'll never be an end to the legacy of what you made and recorded, especially during the rock era when there was all those AOR radio stations and all those live broadcasts and all the King Biscuits, and everywhere you went, somebody was having you play on their radio station.
A few years ago, you were at Abbey Road Studios in London. You supervised the re-release of the entire Beatles catalog in mono from the absolute original mono masters.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Psychedelic. It was totally psychedelic. I kept wondering the first week, how did you get here? How did you get here? What the hell happened? And boy, that's a long, interesting story. But Jeff Jones, by that time, had become head of Apple, the Beatles. And he had been the head of Legacy when I was the head of A&R. And we knew we could count on each other. And they had put out a stereo vinyl box, and then a CD stereo box and a CD mono box all together, for which they won a Grammy. So at one point, Jeff sent me the all that stuff and asked me what I thought about it. And the guy just sent me all these box sets, and they're fantastic and they're beautiful. And what am I going to be, a schnorrer and say, well, this is supposed to be yellow and that one now? I said, it's great, it's fantastic. He goes, no. Well, how do you think it sounds? I went, so I decided I would put on the stereo vinyl side B of Abbey Road. Beautiful. But first, I went and got my old copy. In 1969, when I worked at New England Music City in Kenmore Square, I asked my boss, hey, I found a guy in London. He'll sell us Abbey Road this week, and I can buy 2,000 copies, and we'll be the first store in America to have Abbey Road. And he said, why would you do that? So I guess I was already a marketing guy, because I said, because we'll sell 4,000 and more records. He goes, why? I said, because we'll only let customers buy one record of Abbey Road, but they could buy another record as well. So nobody's going to come into the store, at midnight. Let's go from midnight to 3 a.m. So we're going to open at midnight and only sell Abbey Road plus one other record, but not 2 copies of Abbey Road. He said, why would you do that? I said, because we'll sell 4,000 records. That's the whole answer. So schmuck, me, I kept 1 copy of the original Abbey Road from the first week of release. So before I put on the new Beatles record, I went and played the old one at this very space where I am right now on this turntable that's right in front of me. And I put on the side B of Abbey Road, and it sounded a little bit scratchy because I had played it over the years, but it sounded fantastic. And then I put on the new one and said, oh my God, it's cut from digital. And so he finally said, so what do you think of the sound? I went, I think it's all great, Jeff, and you guys are going to do great, and it's congratulations. And then I said, why did you cut the records from digital? Because how do you know that? I said, because I can hear it. And a lot of us can hear it. He goes, well, we had to, and that's the state of the tapes of stereo. And long story short, I said, well, I don't know. It's the Beatles. I don't know if I would do that. Okay. And now they won a Grammy. So who knows? What the hell do I know? But then a couple of months later, he goes, all right, you want to do the monos? And I went, yeah, are you kidding me? And so we figured out how we would do it. And he goes, well, if you were to do the monos, what would you do? I said, what would I do?
Listen to the originals.
What would I do to the records that changed the world? I would do my best to make them sound exactly the way that, that the producer and the band made them sound. The way that George Martin and the 4 guys and the engineers made them sound. Nobody has a better idea than that. I certainly don't. So I got to go there, and first thing was I found all of the original pressings of all the records, and then found the tapes that made those pressings, and then we listened to all those, and then we started in on a new production in a complete analog chain, no digital, nothing, no conversions, the old way. A tape, you cut it to to vinyl, and that's what we did. And I spent about 80 days there, and it was every day I was pinching myself. It was a trip. Like, how did I get here?
Is there a photo of you on the crosswalk in front of Abbey Road Studios anywhere?
Yeah. There's pictures of me, sitting with a box of tapes, and it's like with the Beatles, Abbey, not Abbey Road, because that was only in stereo, but all the rest of here, like, look, it's me holding the Sgt. Pepper tape. This is it. This is the Mona Lisa. This is the work of art. All other things come from this tape.
What do you think of the new release they just put out, John's demo?
I thought it was fabulous. I thought that, first of all, the Beatles should do whatever they want because they're the Beatles. And if there can be more of it, why not? And I thought the song was beautiful and that they were very happy about it. It caused them to remaster the Red and the Blue compilations again, and those sound very good. And I'm glad that it was successful. Look, it's their band. I think all the claims of, well, it's AI, it's not real. Excuse me, they never really played Sgt. Pepper either. What's your point? That was a production.
Yeah.
That's a thing they invented. What would be wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. It was genius.
How is streaming helping or hurting the music business now?
Well, clearly the streaming services, in collusion with the record companies, keep all the money. That's how it's hurt the artists and the songwriters, mostly the artists, because, you used to make $2 from a record. Now you make 0.003 cents from a stream. That's not a business. So the devaluing of the quote unquote commodity of the music is really a horrible signal with regards to the arts, and indicative of a lot of things on our planet of what people think are important, what aren't important. I think that there's more great music than there's ever been. On the other hand, I champion the accessibility of the fact that I can go to various accounts and listen to anything I ever want, and stuff I have and stuff I don't. As you can see, I haven't gotten rid of that much of it. But
when you, after you're done with a project, has anyone thanked you or had any problems with the way that you worked on their music?
I don't know how to answer that. I feel fortunate to have worked with people. I feel fortunate to work with the Aerosmith guys and Elvis Costello right now, and that I still have a way to work, with the Dylan camp and the Miles camp. And I've been working for a couple of years with Taj Mahal, and was involved with a record of his and the Phantom Blues Band that I hope will be coming out next year. And people like things, then they don't like things. They like their own things, and then they don't like their own things. So I try to make the best judgments I can of how to put the music that artist made in the best light that brings it to the fruition that they intended. It isn't about me. I'm a producer. It's not my record. And I respect that tremendously. And as you recall, it was 50 years ago, or was that? Yeah, it was 50 years ago. I decided not to be the musician and associate myself with other artists and those who are great artists. So I'm happy that I've been able to do that and continue.
You don't even have a website. You are a humble guy that just puts his nose to the grindstone and has a real legacy.
I'm not a humble guy, because to do what I do, you have to have quite an ego to make decisions or think you know what something should sound like. On the other hand, if the artists tell me I'm wrong, then I'll be happy to either change it or discuss it or find out their reasons why. I'm not going to just back off. I do this for real and on purpose. And it's sort of like walking the nose on the surfboard. If I make it and I hung tense correctly, I'll get back up and do it again. If I get knocked off, we'll see what happens. I'm interested in doing the projects. I don't promote myself. And it's great that if people want to do that, they should do that. Me, I'm happy to do the work. I'm happy to be a private person. I never wanted to be on TV. AJ, I'm doing this with you today because it's you and because it's Boston and it's local. And people tell me I should write a book. And I went, maybe after I finish all the Hemingways, I can get to a book about me. But I don't think so. I think I think I'm the guy next to the guy. I don't think that I'm very pleased and proud of my own career and that I've got to do this. But other than the passion that I have to give a shit about the music and the trajectory of the music from the moment of creation to the listener and why that's important and what it sounds like is important and how it gets to them is important, I'm not sure that my part is primary. My part is supportive.
Well, that's interesting because my next question would be, is when you get a reissue project, what's the artist's role?
Currently, I'm working on other Dylan projects and Aerosmith and Costello, and they're all completely different than each other. How they occur, what the artist is asking for, what the estate is asking for, what the record company is asking for, how big is the project? How do we editorialize it? What's possible? What's possible now in this very limited world of quote unquote releases, the fact that there's no record stores and we're talking about making things, where the hell do you put them? So it's a whole other different point of view. After I worked at Sony and I started this company, The Music Tells You, I bought a couple of other URLs, which I own. Safeguardmusic.com, sonicarchaeology.com, themusictellsyou.com, and one called boxsetsinspace.com. That's actually where I think we are at the moment, because some of these projects are very vast with a lot of music and content attached to them, from the beginning of the songwriting to the beginning of the sessions and the real sessions, and then maybe the videos, and then the live shows, and then the post-live shows, and et cetera, et cetera. How do you put that all out in a box? What would happen if I told you I would have to do a 75 CD box set for one of these artists of what they did in a certain year? Obviously, that's really not viable these days in most cases, but that doesn't mean you can't put them online and then put some vinyl out or put some CD box sets out, because CDs still are viable in Australia, New Zealand, and some other territories, even to some people in America. So it's tricky, because then you also have the record company as to how much do they want to put out? Do they want to do a 20 CD box set? No, we want to do a 4 CD box set. How the hell am I going to get all this editorial idea into 4 CDs to represent it? So it's kind of like a different deck of cards now that we're playing with, and you got to be smart enough to understand what's the artist's point? What are you editorializing? What is the focus and subject of this quote unquote era or box set? And so it's different in each case. I hope that's an answer.
It is. I want to give a quote from our close friend, Bob Margolin, who played with Muddy Waters. But, to start off, you won 2 Blues Foundation Awards, Best Historical Releases, Breaking It Up, Breaking It Down, Muddy, James Cotton, and Johnny Winter, and Historical Album of the Year, Muddy, Mississippi Waters Live, both with Brookline's Bob Margolin working on it. And Bob has a quote. He said, "Steve was always positive about music, but his career of historic recordings for Columbia Sony Legacy enriches the world's musical heritage. I can forever in his debt for giving me the opportunity to work on Muddy Waters recordings, which I played on. Steve brings friendliness, class, a love of music, vision, and creativity to everything he does. In 1978, on Thanksgiving, I was touring with Muddy in England, opening shows for Eric Clapton. On that night off, the promoter invited us to a new band on Columbia Records, The Cars. And Steve was working with them at the time. And with the Americans at the party on hand, Steve arranged to have the party catered in traditional Thanksgiving cuisine. Not easy to do in England. Our Americans any Americans who were there away from home for the holidays really appreciated that. You told me that the British chef said to you, "You want me to do what with a pumpkin?"
Yeah. I said, "You got to make us about 5 pumpkin pies." He goes, "What?" I said, you need to find pumpkins. You want me to do what with a pumpkin? I said, I need you to make pumpkin pie. We need to have pumpkin pie. So this was actually the chef at the Hotel Dorchester in London, and managed to make a Thanksgiving dinner for the Cars and the Muddy Waters guys. And that was great. I mean, Bob and I have known each other since we were teenagers and played in sort of rival bands in Boston.
I'm gonna ask you the last two questions. Any new bands that you have your eyes on today? What's in the future for you? That's only two questions.
Okay, well, I like Taylor Swift a lot. I went to see the movie and I loved it. And she's something else. I like Billie Eilish also. She's singing the blues to me. I like the 1975. A really big favorite of mine is Robert Glasper and all the stuff that he does. Great keyboard player, interpreter, producer, songwriter. And I got to work with him. We actually worked on that Miles soundtrack together, but I go to see Robert whenever I can. And we've produced some other tracks together, and he's a major talent, and it's new, and it's hip hop, it's jazz, it's rock, it's R&B, it's straight ahead jazz. He's, the closest I can tell you is he's kind of like a modern Quincy Jones, and can go in all directions. And he's quite a powerhouse and a good guy. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look up what I like. There's lots I like.
All right, I'm going to ask you the last question, the same question I asked all my guests at the end of their episode. What was the first concert you ever attended?
The first concert I ever attended was my own. I played. I'd never seen anybody else before I played. Other than, the choir at the synagogue that I was in, if you want to call it that, but it's also an enriching artistic endeavor, or a completely misleading pathway. But I think seeing Bob Dylan early on was great. A most important early concert I saw was The Who at the Boston Tea Party. And the opening act was the Tony Williams Lifetime. And what Tony Williams and Jack Bruce and John McLaughlin were doing, it was like they all had like levitated up off the stage. And it was like a spectacular thing. Seeing Buddy Guy and Junior Wells at Club 47, seeing James Brown at the Sugar Shack, seeing B.B. King at the hell was that? The Highland Tap. It was a club in Roxbury where I first saw BB, that I went with Peter Malick to go see. Louis Lounge in Roxbury. I saw BB King. Pink Floyd at the Orpheum. I mean, all the early Elvis Costello, the beginning of Elvis Costello and Tom Petty and Nick Lowe and Mink DeVille, 77, 78, that was a really rich period where kind of all the roots that I had grown up with, so had all these other artists, and then they were making new music from it. And that was like a revolution in my own midst, all the shit I was thinking about they were doing. So that was all great. Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen at the Boston Tea Party was pretty ridiculous. I saw the Doors for 3 nights, 2 shows a night, when I worked at the Crosstown Bus in Brighton Center. And I did lights, amoeba splashing on them. I worked there that summer of 68. I don't know. Buddy Guy, Hubert. The greatest concert I ever went was Howlin' Wolf at Club 47. It's the first time I saw him. He would roam around the club. He would dive under the tables. He would sniff women's dresses and pants. He'd stand up and knock the tables over. And I thought he was going to devour me. It was the most impressive. By the time I had seen Howlin' Wolf, it was a few years before I saw Ziggy and the Spiders from Mars. And by the time I saw Bowie and the Ziggy, I thought, that's nowhere nearly as outrageous as Howlin' Wolf is.
Steve, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to me. It was great to see you and hear your long and legendary career in life.
Thank you for having me. And I don't know. I don't have a closing statement other than listen hard, and it's important to listen. And human communication is, we got to listen to each other, because everybody's in their own corner and not really listening to anybody at the moment. And it's a sad world we're living in, which I hope will get better. And one of the ways to do it is if you can listen to more music and see more art.
Thank you.
Okay, you too. Bye. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz, and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.